One of the oldest fragments of Sumerian mythology describes conditions on Earth as the Anunnaki arrived and before they had descended to build the cities of Mesopotamia. It tells of a time when the face of the sun and the moon could not be seen, when the Earth's surface was watered profusely, and the clouds descended down to the Earth's surface. It was then, as the tablet states, that the Anunnaki descend. In the epics of Mesopotamia, humanity's creation was secondary and even incidental to the universe's creation and to the colonization of this planet. After the Anunnaki landed, the recovery of the swamps and the building of the cities commenced under Enki's leadership. All the cities had a specific purpose, seemingly to support the mining operations, culminating in the metal processing center at Bad Tibera. The building of the cities, the constant canals and dike repairs, the mining operations, all required considerable effort on the part of the Sons of An. It is with this background that humanity arrives upon the scene. Humanity's creation was conceived and executed not as an end or as a natural development of the civilization of Mesopotamia. Instead, humanity was created as an expedient to satisfy a group of discontented Anunnaki. The scriptures speak of the work done in the Garden of Eden before we were created. It was the Anunnaki who performed all the work that later humanity had to do. Besides the farming, the gods also mined the minerals as they supplied Elohim with silver, gold, gems, and pearls, thereby revealing one of the main activities of the gods before the advent of humanity: early attempts to create a primitive man. The difficulties of their offspring below did not go unheeded by the gods. With the changing climate and environment, they now had to grow much of their own food. At this, they were not very proficient. One of the Sumerian myths, the dispute between cattle and grain, describes the early attempts to ease the suffering of the Anunnaki. As the poem relates, the Sons of An did not know how to grow grain, bake bread, nor make garments. This myth describes attempts in the creation chamber to devise means to provide them with grain and meat. Two goddesses are created to teach the methods of growing their own food and raising animals: Lahar, the cattle goddess, and Ashnan, the grain goddess. These goddesses tried to teach the Anunnaki the arts of agriculture and animal husbandry, but with no success. Then, realizing that this experiment was a total failure, the gods in council decided to take a drastic step: to create a primitive worker. This myth seems to relate to a later period of the Anunnaki, about 100,000 years ago, when the lands no longer supported the giant vegetarian Anunnaki. The legend indicates that the Anunnaki were now meat-eaters by requiring the introduction of animal husbandry. The chief god An decreed that an animal be created, and man shall be his name. It would be charged with the service of the gods so that they might have their rest. Since the previous experiments did not turn out successfully, it was decided to commission Enki, working with the chief nurse Ninhursag, to produce a primitive being. This new creation, called a Lulu by the Anunnaki, was the first primitive man. Enki and Ninhursag conducted several experiments in the Abzu to create a primitive worker. In one of these myths, the imperfect creations are described. Ninhursag fashioned different varieties of individuals from clay, but these all turned out to be utter failures. Finally, after much trial and error, Enki and Ninhursag found a working formula: successful creation of the ape-man Anunnaki hybrid. This procedure is described in the Atrahasis epic, which deals with the creation of man. The story discloses that 14 wombs were gathered together, impregnated with the essence of the gods, and as a result, 7 males and 7 females were created. While the process successfully produced a viable primitive being, it had one major drawback: the creatures could not reproduce themselves, as shown by subsequent events. Both sexes were produced, 7 males and 7 females, suggesting the intent had been to make them capable of reproduction. For some unknown biological reason, the process failed in this. In this manner, primitive man, or Adam, was created, a combination mammal-Anunnaki hybrid. The procedure used by the Sumerians is reflected in Genesis, where it states God's image was imposed on the clay, just as in the Sumerian tablets. God's essence is mixed with the malleable clay of the earth, the ape-man. In the cuneiform accounts, clay is combined with God's essence, and upon this creation they bind it with the image of the gods. In both cases, it should be observed that humanity is created in the image of their God. The question arises, therefore, where did this genetic material come from? Neanderthal people had been on the scene for hundreds of thousands of years due to a slow process of evolution. It was presumably these people that were used in the experiments of the Anunnaki. They are described vividly in the Gilgamesh epic as the wild man who is converted into a civilized being to become the companion of Gilgamesh. Called Enkidu, he is a wild creature that feeds on grass and lives among the animals. Presumably, he was a Neanderthal that was mated with the Anunnaki. From this combination, it was hoped to produce someone more adapted to the changing environment. The Adam of the Bible was not the Homo sapiens of today. He was what one might call Homo saurus, a creature that became our ancestor and the first step in creating modern humans. In just a few years, humanity had taken a quantum jump in evolution. We had suddenly evolved from the wild ape man to a new species known as Cro-Magnon man. The hybrids probably looked like the Anunnaki since they were made in the image of the gods. Genesis is particular about this, for it states, "Then God said, I will make man in my image, after my likeness." Adam was thus created in both the image, or tselem, and likeness of Dmut, his creator. The use of both terms in the biblical text was meant to leave no doubt that humanity was similar in appearance to the gods. Later, as humans intermarried with this species, the Anunnaki strain deteriorated and became more mammal-like and less Anunnaki in appearance. The mammal genes dominated the Anunnaki genes, and humanity became more human and less godlike. It explains humanity's sinful nature and his fall from grace. Original sin was humanity's deviation from the basic original Anunnaki or godly pattern. It also explains why society was forbidden to make any likeness of their gods. Through biological manipulation, the Anunnaki took an existing ape man and gave it part of their divinity. Some scriptures confirm that biological experiments were conducted on Earth and that some got out of hand. These experiments seem to have been done routinely by the Nephilim, who not only possessed advanced technical means in transportation and communications, but in the biological sciences as well. There was much argument among the higher creator gods about allowing the Nephilim to have this ability. Eventually, after much dissent and discussion, they were given these powers, but they remain on the lowest rank of all the creator gods of the universe. In the first book of Enoch, the crimes of the Nephilim before the deluge are disclosed in detail. Dated to the 2nd century BC, this book had lost its importance in the Western Church by the 4th century AD, and is only considered canonical in the Ethiopic Church. Originally in Hebrew and Aramaic, it was translated into Greek and then into Ethiopic, where it was preserved and not found again by Europeans until the 18th century. It is the oldest of the 3 pseudepigraphic books attributed to Enoch, and parts have been found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. According to the first book of Enoch, the Nephilim were given the mission of bringing beneficial arts and crafts to humanity. But what started out as a laudatory endeavor soon turned sour. The Nephilim began to teach humanity the martial arts, the making of swords, knives, shields, and breastplates. They also taught us the forbidden sciences of incantation, alchemy, and astrology. The worst of the crimes they were accused of was toying with genetics. Homo saurus, the primitive man of Eden. Genesis makes the point repeatedly that before the fall, Adam and Eve were naked while they occupied the Garden of Eden. It was not until they ate the forbidden fruit that they realized they were naked and put on clothing. Other ancient religious sources substantiate this condition of humanity. As long as they remained in the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve did not propagate. The Sumerian tablets explain why, because they were mules and could not reproduce their own kind. The fall of man was his acquiring the ability to procreate by taking on mammalian traits. The final genetic change was done by Enki. It was unauthorized and caused much dissension among the gods, and remained an issue festering between Enlil and Enki. Primitive man, or Homo saurus, was placed in the Garden of Eden to grow food, for as Genesis says, the Lord planted a garden in Eden in the east and placed there the man whom he had formed. Since man was created in Enki's Abzu at his headquarters city of Eridu, and it being in the westernmost part of the Mesopotamian plain between the two rivers, it would appear that the fertile area east of Eridu would be the Garden of Eden. Coincidentally, the Sumerians called this area Eden, or the home of the righteous ones. According to Jubilees, Adam and Eve were placed in the Garden of Eden to till and reap it. He protected the garden from birds, beasts, and cattle, and gathered fruit and food. The duties of Adam are described in similar terms in one of the Babylonian versions of the creation of man. It was his duty to maintain the canals and watercourses and raise plants in abundance to fill the granaries of the Anunnaki. Primitive man and Anunnaki gods did all the necessary work in the Garden of Eden until the event known cryptically as the Fall of Man. This workforce, apparently, was not sufficient to do the essential work, and a modification was needed to make the Homo saurus more efficient. To provide for a more significant workforce, it was decided to give the Adam, or Lulu, a reproductive capacity. The Fall of Man, or the creation of Homo sapiens. Biblical scholars reference the fall of man beginning with Adam and Eve being placed in the Garden of Eden. Among the delightful things to eat was the fruit from the two trees. They were the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Adam and Eve are told, "You are free to eat of any tree in the garden except the tree of knowledge of good and bad, of which you are not to eat. For the moment you eat it, you shall be doomed to death." Later, when they ate the forbidden fruit, the immediate and only result was that the eyes of both were opened and they discovered that they were naked. Obviously, wearing clothes was merely a manifestation of something else, probably acquiring knowing or knowledge. The tale of Adam and Eve is the story of a crucial step in humanity's evolution, acquiring the ability to procreate. However, in achieving this, man had to forfeit some of his Anunnaki heritage, his so-called divinity. Man created in the image of the gods. The book of Genesis makes it abundantly clear that man was initially created in the image of his God. And God created man in his image. In the divine image he created them, man and female. Homo saurus, or Anunnaki man, was probably much larger and taller than modern man. Many ancient sources refer to him as having the stature of a giant before the incident in Eden. For example, rabbinical records disclose that Adam, who had been a giant, diminished in stature to the size of an ordinary man. The antediluvian patriarchs and the Sumerian kings were apparently huge men and stood out physically among the hordes of humanity. The Rephaim, the descendants of the Nephilim who lived after the deluge, were also giants. Like the antediluvians, their lifespan seems to have diminished as the Anunnaki blood became more and more diluted with time. Man forfeits long life to become a mammal. While there were two trees in the garden, only the tree of knowledge was taboo. Apparently man had access to the tree of life or immortality since it was not forbidden. Now that he had achieved the ability to procreate, the biblical deity worried that he could also partake of the tree of life and thereby achieve immortality. What if he should stretch out his hand and also take from the tree of life and eat and live forever? So the Lord God banished him from Eden to till the soil from which he was taken. He drove the man out and stationed east of the Garden of Eden the cherubim and the fiery ever-turning sword to guard the way to the tree of life. According to the scriptures, there was no turning back for man. He had now taken the decisive step and achieved knowledge, and could start the mammal race known as mankind or Homo sapiens. In obtaining this, however, he had to give up long life or immortality. The two were mutually exclusive, as indicated in the book of Genesis. Man could have retained his divine form and long life, but remain a mule at best, a sort of limited Homo saurus. Seeing that man now required clothing for protection against the elements, a sympathetic deity made shirts of skins for the man and his wife and clothed them. However, this great deity probably had other reasons in mind, for as the Haggadah reveals, the clothes were made of skins sloughed off by the Anunnaki. Was this done to remind man of his Anunnaki origins? It was an ironic way of impressing on man's memory that he originated as an Anunnaki and that he existed at the tolerance of the Anunnaki gods. The myth of creation as seen in the tale of Adapa. While no Sumerian myth has been found thus far that parallels the fall of man as related in the Old Testament, there is one poem that tells of a story that is probably the source of the Genesis account. The tale of Adapa was found in the archives of Egyptian kings at El Amarna and the library of the Assyrian king Ashur-bani-pal. Like that of the Gilgamesh epic, its central theme is man squandering an opportunity for gaining immortality. Adapa was a model specimen of the Homo sapiens created by Enki in the Abzu. Like the Adam of Genesis, Adapa had achieved knowledge, but not immortality. The tale begins with the statement, "With wide understanding to him, he, Enki, had given wisdom, but eternal life he had not given him." Enki had trained Adapa to do specialized chores for his household. One day, as the story unfolds, Adapa was out in his boat fishing to obtain food for Enki's table when the south wind came up and swamped the boat. As the story states, Adapa cursed the wind and broke the wing of the south wind. This is a curious phrase indeed. In the myth of Zu, one of the weapons unleashed against Zu and the one that finally defeated him was the south wind. Its context makes it sound like a winged craft of some sort. In Adapa's case, he seems to have disabled it accidentally. Meanwhile, up in his heavenly abode, the chief god An is worried that the south wind has not blown over the land for 7 days, and asked his vizier to investigate. When he reported back that a mere mortal had disabled the south wind, An was furious and angrily summoned Adapa to give an account of himself. Enki, who was not only man's creator, but quite often his defender and benefactor, briefed Adapa on how to act in the presence of the great god. Adapa is told how to reach the heavenly ship of An. In the account, Enki made him take the road to heaven, and to heaven he went up. He is warned that he will be offered the bread of death, thou shalt not eat it. He will then be shown the water of death, thou shalt not drink it, warns Enki. Adapa was ushered into the presence of the god An, who asked him pointedly why he had broken the south wind. Adapa explained that he was catching fish for his master's table. The sea was like a mirror until the south wind came up and overturned his boat, indicating that his boat was swamped by the blast of wind from the apparently low-flying south wind. An was impressed by Adapa's intelligence and the fact that he had learned forbidden things, that is, information that was privileged to the gods and their semi-divine offspring. He further questioned Adapa about Enki's disclosure of the plan of heaven and earth to a worthless human like him. Furthermore, An asked why Enki had made a Shumu for him. The chief god wondered what to do with Adapa now that he knew the road to the gods, since he had travelled from earth to heaven in a Shumu, a journey only allowed to the gods. In this sense, the Sumerian word Shumu obviously refers to some sort of shuttle to reach the orbiting ship in the heavens. This term is discussed later. To continue the story of Adapa, it was decided to have him join the ranks of the gods by providing him with the bread and water of life. In this way, Adapa would achieve immortality and become like one of the gods. Actually, it would mean reverting back to his Anunnaki nature. This may be why he was forewarned by Enki, who did not want his creation tampered with. When Adapa refused the food and water of immortality, An wanted to know why. Adapa told him of the warning of Enki, which infuriated An, and he sent down a messenger to chastise Enki. However, An finally relented, but it was too late for Adapa. Symbolically, man had missed the chance of achieving everlasting life. Adapa returned to Earth, a trip during which he saw the wonders of space. As Adapa from the horizon of heaven to the zenith of heaven cast a glance, saw its awesomeness. But what is more important to the story of Adapa as a parallel to Adam in Eden is that it was decided by the gods that he, like Adam, would be the ancestor of humanity. An decreed that as his destiny, Adapa would be the seed of humanity. The food and water of life are often portrayed on Sumerian cylinder seals and murals. The gods are sometimes shown with a pine cone in one hand and a water bucket or situla in the other hand, representing the food and water of eternal life or immortality. The sad story is that humanity could not have the best of two possible worlds, mammal form and long life. It explains why man's lifespan shortened progressively as each generation diluted the Anunnaki gene further. The gods were unhappy with the deterioration of the Anunnaki traits and would not let man forget his choice in the years to come. It echoes throughout the chapters of the Old Testament as the weakness of the flesh. The further humanity evolved from their Anunnaki origins, the less they remembered of it. Through a long process of selective amnesia abetted by a secretive and self-perpetuating priesthood, humanity has succeeded in denying all knowledge of Anunnaki ancestry. The genealogy of man. It is a perplexing problem of the missing link that has baffled evolutionists for over 100 years. Is it possible that the so-called missing link will never be found? And more importantly, if this missing link is ever discovered, it will most likely be in the ruins of the ancient civilization of the Valley of Mesopotamia. The perception of the serpent as evil. Besides Adam and Eve, the other important denizen of the Garden of Eden was the serpent. He is given qualities that rival and surpass those of Adam. Even Genesis concedes the point when it asserts that the serpent was the shrewdest of all the wild beasts that God had made. The Haggadah describes the serpent as tall, two-legged, and with superior mental powers. He was lord over all the beasts of Eden. God spoke to the serpent, "I created you to be king over all the animals. I made you be of an upright position." In the Haggadah, there seems to be little doubt that he walked like a man. In Genesis, the serpent was severely punished for his role in the downfall of Adam and Eve. His fate was henceforth to crawl on his belly. In this way, Genesis implies that the serpent was a legged creature and lost his limbs due to the eating of the forbidden fruit. The notion of the serpent as evil is a relatively recent one, for it is one that developed during the early Christian era. In actuality, the biblical serpent is often connected with divine knowledge, healing, and immortality. The Hebrew word for the creature who tempted Eve is Nachash, which is usually translated as a serpent, but literally means he who solves secrets. Two streams of understanding seem to have contributed to the legend of the serpent as evil and repulsive. By the time of the deluge, man had come to despise and even to persecute these creatures. Ancient sources strongly suggest that anyone showing signs of serpent god ancestry was hunted down and destroyed. The second major factor in the evolution of them as evil was the enmity between Enlil and Enki. When the lands were reclaimed after the deluge, Enlil saw to it that his sons were placed in charge of the grounds of the Middle East and that Enki's sons were allotted foreign lands, such as Egypt and the Indus Valley. However, the sons of Enki returned to the Middle East, and his oldest son Marduk seized control of Babylon and claimed the coveted title of 50. Enki is remembered as the creator and benefactor of humanity, and is associated with divine knowledge, healing, and immortality, precisely the qualities attributed to the serpent in the Garden of Eden. Thus, the biblical fall of man takes on the character of a confrontation between Enlil, the Elohim of the Old Testament, and Enki, the usurper serpent god. The same conflict is seen in the tale of Adapa when Enki prevented An from tampering with his creation. There were echoes of this dissension in the third book of Enoch, when this patriarch was given godhood and immortality. The angels, representing the older order, protested that God was revealing divine secrets to man. They remind him that, did not the primeval ones give you good advice when they said don't create man? The Anunnaki delighted in their appearance. Their sleek, lustrous, and gleaming bodies and mammal traits were repugnant to them. It is difficult to see how physical repugnance to these creatures developed. On the other hand, the lingering memory of the rough treatment by the reptilian ancestors may exist in our subconscious and contribute to the dislike of reptiles. Immortality as achieved by regeneration. Man seems to consistently achieve some sort of knowledge, yet he loses immortality in ancient legends. It is as if the two are mutually exclusive. Adam gets knowledge, but is banned from the garden and from taking the fruit of the tree of life. So it is with Adapa, who is given knowledge by Enki, but is cheated of the drink and food of life that would have made him immortal. Many of the adventures of Gilgamesh are attempts to achieve immortality. He is denied a trip up to the heavens to plead to the gods for long life. He is then refused it when he reaches Utnapishtim, his grandfather. He finally obtains the magical plant that heals and extends life, but it is stolen from him by a serpent, no doubt an imagery of the serpent gods. In world mythology, the serpent symbolizes long life, cure and regeneration, and immortality. Snakes have been associated with healing everywhere. For example, the Mayan Chilam Balam relates that the first inhabitants of Yucatan were the Janes, or people of the serpent. They came across the water from the east with their leader Itzamna, or serpent of the east. He was a healer and could cure by laying on of hands and even revived the dead. In the Old Testament, the serpent's role as a healer is illustrated in the incident of the brazen serpent, or seraph. The serpent was raised on a pole and became a cure for ailments during their exodus from Egypt. The duality of knowledge and immortality, as represented by the two trees in Eden, is not generally found in ancient sources. Besides the brief references in the tale of Adapa, ancient literature concentrates on man's efforts to achieve immortality and extended life. The symbolic tree of life and the magical food and drink were popular subjects among the various cultures of the Middle East and often appear in their art forms. The opposite is true of the Old Testament, where immortality is all but forgotten. The emphasis is more on the sins of man caused by his downfall when he achieved knowledge. An exception is found in the pseudepigraphic document called The Life of Adam and Eve, which narrates episodes in the life of Adam and Eve after these two left Eden. Dated to the 1st century AD, it is available in both Greek and Latin versions. It provides a little known even of Adam's attempt to obtain some of these rejuvenating remedies. According to the text, Adam was old and sickly and near the end of his life. He requested Eve and his son Seth to return to Eden for the oil from the tree of mercy with which he might be anointed, relieved of his pain, and have his life extended. At the gates of Eden, they are met by the angel Michael, who refuses the plea of Seth with the argument that the magic elixir is not for man. The Hebrew view would suggest that the emphasis on knowing by the early priesthood was a deliberate deviation to force on their people a doctrine of original sin and the fall of man, and thus achieve a significant degree of control over their minds and behavior. The search for regeneration, a form of immortality, has been a common theme of ancient literature and mythology. It is a sub-theme in the Gilgamesh epic, where after telling his grandson that the gods had refused him immortality, Utnapishtim has compassion for his grandson and informs Gilgamesh of a magical plant that restores youth and vitality and where to find it. Thus, on his return home, Gilgamesh follows the directions of his grandfather and manages to obtain this magical plant. He decides, somewhat unwisely, to stop by a pool of water to bathe. He foolishly leaves the magic plant on shore unattended as he is bathing, and much to his consternation, a snake, or seru, smelled the fragrance of the plant, came up through the water and carried it away. As the serpent left, it threw off its skin. In this way, the story represents the regenerative ability of the serpent to extend its life by shedding its skin periodically. Of those who achieved true immortality and joined the gods, only 2 are recorded in ancient literature. The gods made it clear that it was not granted lightly. Utnapishtim is one of the few who was given immortality. After the deluge, Utnapishtim and his wife were taken up and placed through a ritual by Enlil. Hitherto, Utnapishtim had been but a man, But now Utnapishtim and his wife shall be unto us gods. He was sent to live at the source of the 2 rivers where Shamash rises, in the land of Dilmun. Unlike his counterpart, Noah did not achieve immortality. The gods of the Old Testament were much more jealous and uncompromising gods. One of the patriarchs before the deluge achieved this distinction. It is passed over cryptically in Genesis, which states that Enoch walked with God. Then he vanished because God took him. Nonetheless, the 3 apocalyptic books of Enoch provide the whole story, details which were omitted from the Bible. Enoch was made immortal and deified so that he became second in power to the chief deity himself. This unusual metamorphosis was done to provide an objective magistrate who could preside over the trial of the Nephilim. Are long lifespans possible? Longevity among the ancients is proverbial. The name of the patriarch Methuselah has been synonymous with an extra-long lifespan. If the ancient records, both religious and secular, are believed, the antediluvian kings and patriarchs enjoyed an unusually long lifespan. These claims are so consistent, and even allowing for exaggeration, one is forced to concede that there must be some truth in them. Tacitly, modern man is beginning to take these claims seriously. For today, he is toying with the possibilities that aging can be brought under control, even reversed, and that lifespans can logically be extended to a remarkable degree. Perhaps someday we will achieve the technical sophistication of our ancestors, the serpent gods who seem to have solved these perplexing scientific problems.